There is a version of you that only exists when nobody else is in the room. The one who decides whether to get up or stay down. The one who talks to you while you brush your teeth, while you drive, while you lie awake at 2 in the morning, replaying a conversation from 6 years ago. Everyone you know deals with a version of themselves like this. Almost nobody trains it. 18 centuries ago, the most powerful man on earth sat in a military tent on the frozen edge of the Roman Empire and did something strange. He had armies waiting on his orders. A plague was killing his people by the hundreds of thousands. Germanic tribes were pressing the northern border, and half his co-emperor's legacy was collapsing behind him. And at night, when the camp went quiet, he took out a notebook and wrote arguments against himself. Not letters, not speeches, not policy. Private notes, in Greek instead of his native Latin, addressed to no one. He corrected his own thinking, the way a trainer corrects a student's stance. He told himself where he had been vain that day, where he had been lazy, where he had let another man's rudeness live in his head rent-free. He never intended a single page to be read by anyone else. The working title, as far as we can tell, was simply this: To Himself. His name was Marcus Aurelius. The notebook survived by accident, and we call it the Meditations. It is one of the most read books in human history, and every word of it was written in silence, for an audience of one. Before we go on, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far this story travels, and if you're loving it so far, join the family by hitting subscribe, because tomorrow we've got something special lined up just for you. Now, Rome, the year 170, a war camp on the Danube, and the notebook that was never supposed to exist. Marcus Aurelius did not fight his way to power. Power came looking for him, and by most accounts he would have preferred it hadn't. He was born in 121 AD, to a wealthy Roman family, and orphaned of his father as a small child. The Emperor Hadrian noticed him young. Hadrian nicknamed the boy Verissimus, truest one, a pun on his family name, because even as a child, Marcus had a reputation for saying exactly what was so. When Hadrian arranged the imperial succession near the end of his life, he required his chosen heir, Antoninus Pius, to adopt the teenage Marcus in turn. At 17, Marcus learned that he would one day rule the known world. The ancient sources record his reaction. He was distressed. When he moved into the imperial household, he reportedly had to be persuaded to leave his mother's villa, and he listed for his friends all the men whom absolute power had ruined. Understand what that means. Most people spend their lives chasing a fraction of what was handed to this teenager, and his first instinct on receiving it was to worry about what it would do to his character. That instinct never left him. It became the organizing question of his entire life. How do you hold power without letting power hold you? His answer took 40 years to build, and none of it was built in public. As heir to the empire, Marcus received the finest education money and status could buy. The star of that education was Fronto, the most celebrated orator in Rome, hired to make Marcus a master of rhetoric. Rhetoric was the skill of emperors, the ability to move a crowd, to win a senate, to sound right whether or not you were right. Marcus was good at it. His surviving letters to Fronto show real affection and real talent. And then, in his mid-20s, he quietly walked away from it. The man responsible was Junius Rusticus, a Stoic philosopher who did something no one else in the young Caesar's life dared to do. He criticized him, openly, specifically, to his face. Marcus records in the Meditations that Rusticus taught him to abandon fancy speech, to stop showing off, to write simply, and to forgive people the moment they wanted to make amends. Rusticus also lent him a copy of the Discourses of Epictetus, a former slave whose entire philosophy came down to a single division. Some things are up to you, and most things are not. Your judgments, your responses, Your character are up to you. Everything else, including your reputation, your health, and the behavior of every other human being, is not. Marcus read it, and something settled in him permanently. He wrote later that he thanked the gods that when he fell in love with philosophy, he did not fall in with a fraud, and did not waste his time on writers or on solving logic puzzles. What he wanted from philosophy was narrower and harder. He wanted a daily method for being a decent man under indecent pressure. Fronto never fully forgave the philosophers for stealing his student. The letters show him needling Marcus about it for years. Marcus stayed polite, stayed warm, and stayed gone. He had made the trade that defines his whole story. He gave up the art of sounding good to strangers and took up the art of being good in private. One of these skills has an audience. The other one only has a witness, and the witness is you. Strip away the toga and the marble bust and look at the routine, because the routine is the whole secret. The Stoics Marcus followed had specific daily exercises, and the Meditations shows him running them over and over like a man doing drills, not describing them, doing them, on the page, in real time. The first was the morning rehearsal. Book 2 opens with it. Say to yourself at daybreak, "Today I will meet the interfering, the ungrateful, the arrogant, the dishonest, the envious, the rude." He then reminds himself why they act that way, that they cannot actually injure his character, and that he was made to work with them, not against them. Read that closely. The Emperor of Rome began his day by preloading his responses to every difficult person he would meet, hours before meeting them. By the time the arrogant senator or the lying official actually appeared, the decision about how to respond had already been made in silence, in bed, alone. The encounter was just the execution. The second was the evening review, a practice the Stoics inherited from earlier philosophers. At the end of the day, you audit yourself. Where did I go wrong? What did I do? What did I leave undone? The Meditations is essentially 12 books of this audit. He catches himself craving praise and interrogates the craving. He catches himself irritated and asks what the irritation is actually about. He is never performing humility for a reader, because there was no reader. He is doing maintenance. The third was perspective work. When something felt overwhelming, he would deliberately zoom out. He pictures Rome from a great height, all its crowds and courts and armies looking like ants on a crumb. He reminds himself that the emperors before him, with all their noise and wars and banquets, are dust, and their names are already fading. He does this to his own fame too. He tells himself flatly that posthumous glory is worthless, that the people who will supposedly remember you will die as well, and that the applause of the future is being chased by people who cannot even stand the people applauding them now. There is dry humor buried in these pages, and it is always pointed at himself. He complains about not wanting to get out of bed on cold mornings, and then argues with himself like a lawyer. Were you born to feel nice under warm covers? Do the bees refuse to do bee work? He loses the argument and gets up. The most powerful man in the world, negotiating with his own blanket and writing down the transcript so he could do better tomorrow. That is what building yourself in silence actually looks like. It is not mystical. It is a man keeping minutes of the meetings he holds with himself. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Any philosophy can look good in a library. Marcus's philosophy was tested in conditions that broke stronger-looking men. He became emperor in 161, and almost nothing went right afterward. A war with Parthia in the east. The soldiers came home from that war carrying something with them, a disease we now call the Antonine Plague, likely smallpox. It burned through the empire for years and killed on a scale Rome had never seen. Some modern estimates run into the millions. Then the northern tribes crossed the Danube in force, and Marcus, a bookish man in his 40s with a weak stomach and chronic chest pain, had to become a field commander. He spent most of his last decade not in Rome but in armed camps in what is now Austria, Hungary, and Serbia, in the cold, at war. This is where the Meditations was physically written. He notes the locations himself, among the Quadi on the river Granua at Carnuntum. Picture it honestly. A sick, aging man, grieving several of his own children, presiding over a plague and a war at the same time, and his response, at night, is to sit down and remind himself that fear of an event usually does more damage than the event, that he controls his judgments and nothing else, and that the obstacle in the path can become the path. That last idea, that what blocks action can feed action, comes straight out of his notebook, written in the mud of a frontier war. Nobody made him do this. There was no accountability partner, no audience, no public commitment. Every incentive of his position pushed the other way. An emperor's evenings could be filled with anything an emperor wanted. He chose an audit, and the audit held. Contemporaries who had every reason to flatter him and contemporaries who had none described the same man: patient, unhurried, hard to provoke, plain in his habits, generous past the point his advisers liked. Cassius Dio, the historian, wrote that Marcus stayed the same man through every change of fortune. That consistency was not a personality he was born with. His own notes prove it, because his own notes show him struggling toward it, entry after entry, year after year. The calm everyone saw in public was manufactured nightly in private. If there is a practice in your own life that you keep dropping because nobody checks on it, walk this path. The practices nobody checks on are the ones that build the self everyone eventually sees. If this path speaks to you, support the video and keep walking it with us. In 175, the philosophy faced its hardest exam. Avidius Cassius was Marcus's most capable general, the man who had won the Eastern War, governor of a huge stretch of the empire. In the spring of 105, a rumor spread through the East that Marcus was dead or dying. Cassius declared himself emperor. The eastern provinces, including Egypt, Rome's grain supply, went with him. This was not a protest. It was a civil war, aimed at Marcus's life and his sons. Now watch what silence had built. Marcus's recorded response was grief, not rage, and his stated intention shocked his own court. He hoped to capture Cassius alive so that he could pardon him. He reportedly told his soldiers that the one prize he wanted from the war was to end it without killing the man who started it, and to show Rome that even civil war could be settled fairly. His army thought he had lost his mind. He hadn't. He had simply been rehearsing this exact situation, in the abstract, every morning for 30 years. Today I will meet the ungrateful and the treacherous. He had met one. The response was already drafted. He never got to deliver the pardon. 3 months in, Cassius's own officers murdered him and sent his head to Marcus. Marcus refused to look at it and ordered it buried. Then came the detail that tells you everything. Cassius's correspondence was captured, letters that would have named every senator and official who had secretly backed the rebellion. A normal emperor's purge would have run for years on those letters. Marcus had them burned unread. He did not want to know. He understood that a list of enemies is a possession that owns its owner, and he declined to own it. The Senate begged him to execute the conspirators' families. He protected them instead, and asked that no senator be put to death for the affair. None of that was improvised mercy. Improvised mercy does not survive contact with a betrayal that large. It was trained mercy, drilled in a notebook, in the dark, for decades, until it was simply what came out of him under pressure. You do not rise to the occasion. You fall to the level of your private practice. his private practice was very high. Be careful with the word, because silence here does not mean isolation, and it does not mean secrecy for its own sake. Marcus was surrounded by people his entire life: courts, councils, armies, family. His silence was not the absence of people. It was the existence of a space where his self-construction happened without spectators, which meant without performance. That distinction is the entire mechanism. Anything you do in front of others gets bent by the watching. Modern psychology has a name for one version of this: the audience effect. The measurable change in performance and behavior when people know they are observed. Some of that change is useful. Much of it is corrosive, because the watched self starts optimizing for the appearance of the quality instead of the quality. Watched discipline drifts toward looking disciplined. Watched virtue drifts toward looking virtuous. The drift is invisible to the person drifting. The only place a self can be built straight is a place with no one to perform for. Marcus knew this so thoroughly that he built the principle into his notes. He warns himself against doing good deeds and then keeping score of them, against being the kind of man who helps and then waits, visibly, for credit. His standard was the vine, which produces grapes and asks for nothing, and produces again next season. He wrote that a man's worth is measured by the worth of what he gives his attention to, and his attention, every night, went to the gap between the man he was that day and the man he intended to be. Here is the part people miss about the Meditations. It contains no announcement. In 12 books, he never once tells himself that he is planning to become disciplined, that a new regime starts Monday, that this year will be different. There are no declarations, because declarations are for audiences, and he had none. There is only the day just lived, examined, and the next morning, prepared. The entire book is the middle of the work. That is what work done in silence looks like. It has no launch and no announcement. It only has repetitions. You are not running an empire. The mechanics of your situation are still the same as his, because the mechanics were never about Rome. You also have a self that shows up when nobody is watching, and that self is being trained right now, today, by whatever you repeatedly do in private. The question is only whether the training is deliberate or accidental. Marcus's advantage over almost everyone around him came from one decision. He made it deliberate. He treated his inner life as a project with a daily practice, instead of weather that happened to him. The practice transfers almost embarrassingly well. A morning rehearsal costs 3 minutes. Name the difficulties the day will actually contain, and decide your responses before the day starts arguing with you. An evening review costs 5. Where did I go wrong? What did I do? What did I leave undone? On paper, for no one. The perspective drill costs seconds. When something feels enormous, zoom out until it is the correct size. None of this requires talent. It requires privacy and repetition, which are the 2 cheapest resources you have, and the 2 you most consistently give away, one to your phone and the other to your moods. And write it down. This part matters more than it seems. Marcus did not just think about his day. He prosecuted it in writing, because writing will not let you be vague. A thought can hide. A sentence has to commit. The notebook was his method for making the invisible self hold still long enough to be corrected. He died in 180. In a camp near the Danube, still at war, still doing the work. He never knew the notebook would survive. He would probably be appalled that it did, and that strangers 18 centuries later would read his private corrections. But the accident is instructive. The only book he wrote for nobody became the only thing of his that everybody reads, while the speeches he was trained to give, the public performances polished for maximum effect on an audience, are gone. The work done for spectators evaporated. The work done in silence outlived the empire. Drop silence in the comments if you are building something right now that nobody in your life knows about. Subscribe to Presence and Purpose for ancient wisdom, tested by time and confirmed by science. The most powerful man in the world had a practice he showed to no one. It was the practice that made him the man the world saw. Everything public was built in private. It always is. Thanks for watching. Another one's coming tomorrow.